Hello laddies. These videos are going to start getting very short, so apologies for the lengthy videos thus far. I know it can feel a bit overwhelming, but if nothing else, it can prepare you for medical school, hopefully. For instance, this is 75 slides, and in a systems course, one exam might be over 25 hours of lecture, and then each lecture will have like 60 slides. So it's nothing you won't see in the future. Oh, dude, I heard on NPR this morning on 1A with Joshua Johnson or whatever the host is, they were talking about the lack of financial literacy education in high schools across America. So my man, Joshua Johnson, he agrees with me. So that got me pretty pumped up. Hope you guys have started your Roth IRAs. If you didn't, minus an A for you. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, quick video on CSF. Okay, this will be a test question. The flow of CSF. Gotta know it. It will make life so easy for you when you get to neuro, especially. Alright, so I have side by side the flow diagram and the picture of where it is in space. This is kind of creepy. I don't know why. It's like he only has ventricles, was born without a brain or something. But it's nice because it shows you where the ventricles sit in your head. So let's start at the beginning. Well, actually, first of all, I want to point out there is choroid plexus that lines all the ventricles, lateral ventricles, third and fourth. And so CSF is being produced at all the ventricles. It doesn't just get produced at the start of the studying of the circulation. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's start at the lateral ventricles. So remember there are two lateral ventricles, okay, and that's the only ventricle that there's two of. Right? 1, 2. And I totally have gotten this confused before and forgot that there were two lateral ventricles. And then, anyway, I think because the names, like the third and the fourth ventricle, I don't know. But anyway, from there, the CSF travels through this guy, interventricular foramen. You also see foramen of Monroe. Let's cross those off. Next, third ventricle, right here. Next, it travels through the cerebral aqueduct. You'll also see it called the aqueduct of Sylvius. Next, fourth ventricle down here. Then to get into the subarachnoid space, it can go through 3 different foramina. And remember, foramen just means hole. It can stay midline, M for midline, and go through the foramen of Magendie, should be down this way, or it can shoot off laterally through one of the 2 foramina of Luschka. Next, the subarachnoid space, and this is where the CSF can pool if there is defective resorption back into the venous system. Okay, so let's look at what normally happens first. Lining the subarachnoid space, there are these arachnoid villi. You will also see the term granulations. I kind of like that better, arachnoid granulations. I think it's used more, I don't know. But those are really, really, really important because that is what is responsible for getting your CSF back into the venous system. So it first enters the superior sagittal sinus, and then it goes through something called the dural venous sinus system. Okay, and back to the from there it goes, I think it dumps straight into the superior vena cava. I think so. I don't know. Anyway, it goes back into the venous system. What else do I want to point out here? Okay, so when it comes to things like obstructive hydrocephalus, you got to have this flow down because, for instance, the most common location for something called congenital hydrocephalus is aqueductal stenosis. Stenosis is a narrowing, so these kids are born with a narrowing of their cerebral aqueduct. So the reason you have to know this pathway so well is you have to know which ventricles would bulge up, so to speak. So anytime you block something, the things in front of it will increase, kind of like biochemistry. Remember those enzymes? If an enzyme isn't working, the pathway before the enzyme the substrates will build up, right? Kind of similar concept. So in the case of aqueductal stenosis, the third ventricle would swell up and the lateral ventricles would swell up. So just, test question. If you're given a certain type of obstructive hydrocephalus, then you got to know, where is it going to back up to? Cool. Let's keep these short. Sorry. Okay, just some high yield points. Choroid plexus is obviously where the CSF is made, and they're ependymal cells. Remember, or actually, I'll talk about glial cells later, but these are specialized glial cells that make up the choroid plexus. One thing about the choroid plexus is, so remember that a CSF is an ultrafiltrate of plasma. Okay, so the fluid is traveling from your circulation, like blood and plasma, into the area that cushions the brain. I kind of like the term buoyancy because that is a perfect descriptor of what the CSF does. If you ever go on like scuba diving, you have to stay buoyant and maintain buoyancy, and you have to kind of float good. But I don't know, I like that term. It's like CSF is like a cushion, buoyancy. The brain's like very fluid, so it moves around a lot. If you see like a live animation, it looks like jello that's just kind of like wiggling and wobbling around, and that's allowed to do that because of CSF. CSF is also what prevents everybody from getting a traumatic brain injury and concussion from getting hit in the head. Anyway, the choroid plexus is part of the blood-brain barrier, which makes sense because CSF comes from the plasma, so it's got to get in there somehow. And it is the best place for pathogens to cross, especially like bacteria. And what's our big fear with that is meningitis, especially bacterial meningitis can be very deadly. So if bacteria enters through the choroid plexus, it goes through this flow, it can end up in the subarachnoid space, which is not good because then it's not the bacteria that cause the meningitis, so to speak. It's our immune response. There's cytokines, inflammatory mediators that cause a bunch of damage. It overwhelms the arachnoid granulation, so you can't get the CSF out quick enough, and our own immune cells, because of the bacteria present, basically cause meningitis. Arachnoid granulation is important. Yeah, okay, good enough. Ependymal cells, the type of glia that make up the choroid plexus. There is a type of cancer called ependymomas, and you'll see these in kids usually in the question stem, and most common location in the choroid plexus that lines the fourth ventricle. And though that can also cause hydrocephalus. So if the fourth ventricle gets knocked out, then everything's going to blow up in front of that. Okay, so just for classification purposes, I never really liked this classification, but we still teach it. So show it to you. I'll try using the highlighter, see if that's fun. So communicating hydrocephalus, non-obstructive might be a better way to think about it, can happen if it's either not reabsorbed normally, which would be defective absorption by the arachnoid granulations, tissue surrounding. So that would be an example of that. Obstructive is probably the more high yield one. It is due to an obstruction. So like a malformation, like aqueductal stenosis and narrowing subaqueduct. It can be congenital, or it could be like a tumor later on in life, like an ependymoma. Communicating, I think they just call it that because the ventricles can still communicate with one another, and then non-communicating, it's like blocked off. But I don't know, I never liked those terms. But with this type, think either too much CSF production or bad resorption into venous system. And that, remember oh, what the heck? That is, I hope this recorded, man. That's so annoying. Okay. And obstructive, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that can cause that. I mean, like tumors, congenital malformations. Anyway, that is it for this one. We'll do a quick one on muscle reflexes next time. Dude, I'm going to be so pissed if this didn't work.